Hi, this is Stuart Weems and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to give you simple, easy to understand strategies, insights and tips to help you master the game of building wealth. And in this episode, I'd like to talk about how you should split your wealth between property and shares. So, Australians have a really well documented love affair with property, things like chasing the great Australian dream of owning your own home, and about 2.1 million people, taxpayers that is, invest in property. And also, most of us invest in shares through our superannuation fund. So most of us have experience there as well. And I think most people just struggle with the decision, should they be investing in property or shares, or if both, how much to invest in one or the other. And is there any particular order in which you should invest in those assets as well, so one before the other? And that's what I'd like to talk about throughout this podcast. So with like many things in life, moderation is the key, and all things being equal, diversification with investments is typically the wisest approach. So spreading your money across different asset classes will reduce your overall investment risk, because some asset classes will perform well in some years and others not so well. And so the returns from the asset classes that perform well will offset some of the poorer returns of the other asset classes, and what you end up doing is smoothing your investment return, which certainly helps you along the journey, but also if you need to interrupt the investment strategy for whatever reason and divest of any assets, well again, because you haven't put all your eggs in one basket, you can do that more prudently and achieve better outcomes in the long run. Plus it's a less bumpy road, right? So it's less stressful, creates less anxiety and so forth. So spreading your eggs amongst a number of different baskets, again, theoretically, is correct. However, sometimes people hate shares or hate property. And I don't think, I believe that you should never invest in an asset unless you are 100% comfortable with that asset. So if you have a level of uncomfortableness with either property or shares, certainly explore it and see if it's due to a misunderstanding or past mistakes or those sorts of things. Don't be blind to it. But ultimately, if you're just not comfortable, don't invest in it. And at the end of the day, quality trumps diversification. So that is, I would much rather see my client put all their money into great quality properties and have zero shares. In the long run, that's going to work, as opposed to trying to push them into an asset class where they're not comfortable. In terms of property, sometimes you see businesses or articles online that promote the idea of acquiring a very large property portfolio. Acquire 5 to 10 properties. And I think this is quite attractive to a lot of people's egos and so forth. Sounds like a great idea. And whilst it might be realistic for some people on very high incomes, it's completely unnecessary for most. Most of the financial plans that I formulate would have less than 3 investment properties. In fact, I can't remember a time when I've recommended more than 3. And most of them, I would say 80% of the time, are between 1 or 2 properties. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first one is that quality trumps quantity every day of the week. That is, it's much better to put all your money in one very high quality property than spread your monies across several very average quality properties. Secondly, limiting the amount that you invest leaves room for you to invest in other assets at another time, and therefore allows you to achieve better diversification. So, if you max out all your borrowings on property, for example, you'll find that you won't have any cash flow to make additional super contributions, reduce debt, or invest in shares or other assets, for example. And so over-investing can then reduce your ability to really diversify. So if you come across advice or articles or so forth that are suggesting that that you should put all your eggs in one basket and go on, that the road to financial freedom really lies in acquiring several properties, just be mindful that that's probably not necessary, and do a little bit more research there. The other thing to not fall into the trap of the old pros and cons debate, so the shares versus property debate that's raged on for really many years. I've read lots of different articles and been to seminars and so forth where each party on each side of the equation will espouse the pros and cons of either property or shares. Shares are very liquid. You can invest in smaller amounts. You don't have to worry about dodgy tenants and these sorts of things. Whereas the property people will say, well, it's very tangible. You don't know what you're buying in the share market, and you can borrow a lot more to invest in property than what you can do in shares and so forth. And anyway, the list goes on in terms of the pros and cons. Now, whilst each of those pros and cons are arguably technical or correct, I think they're relatively meaningful at a portfolio level. So, it's a little bit, because at a portfolio level, what you're trying to do is invest in a whole bunch of assets, and some of the pros of some assets will outweigh or offset the cons of other assets and vice versa. And at a portfolio level, what you hope to do is have a perfect mix of assets. It's a little bit like, the analogy is a little bit, if I can draw a golf analogy, it's a little bit like having a golf bag with a whole bunch of different clubs. And you're not going to sit there and debate whether a putter is better than a driver. They both do two completely different things. And to say one is better than the other is nonsensical, really. All golfers would have all different types. They can have some irons, some drivers, some putters, all in their bag. It's not like someone walks around and says, I don't believe in any other club other than a driver, and that's all I'm going to use. So having a shares versus property debate is tantamount to that, is having a discussion around saying, I will only use one set of golf clubs. What you want is a full bag of golf clubs, and so that you've got a pool of different classes of assets that are going to work in different times and do different things for you within your overall portfolio. Of course, watch out for vested interest. As Warren Buffett says, never ask your barber if you need a haircut. Therefore, don't ask a property developer whether you should invest in property or a stockbroker whether you should invest in shares. You obviously want someone that's completely independent, and I've written a few blogs and podcasts about that previously, and the links are obviously in the show notes. It's also not about returns, at least gross investment returns either. So if you find that people are entering, or you're being enticed to enter into a debate which is going to produce a better return, forget about it. It's a bit silly. I think you're going to achieve, if you've got the right approach, asset selection and methodology, that it's reasonable to assume that you're going to achieve relatively or materially similar returns in the long run. So the Aussie stock market over the last 25 years has done 9.3%. The US market is 10.5%. The property market, including yield, somewhere between 10 and 12%. So, the returns are broadly similar in the long run. Of course, the makeup of the return is different in terms of the amount of income and capital growth, and that's important too. But in terms of total return, don't get drawn into the conversation about one's better than the other. When it comes to getting advice in respect to property, how much to put in property and how much to put in shares, the thing that you really need to look for is experience. So the firm that you use for that advice needs to have a good depth and breadth of experience across all asset classes, and arguably that creates enough credibility to decide which is then most appropriate for your circumstances. However, I can have a firm that's completely independent but has very little experience in, say, commercial property, for example. And if I have very little experience in commercial property, then it's really unlikely I'm going to recommend it to my clients. Now, I'm not saying that people should be recommending commercial property. What I'm saying is that you need to have a robust experience to not recommend it for the same reasons when you do recommend it. So that is, you need to really know when and how to use it. See, knowledge will tell us what to do, whereas experience tells us how to do it and when to do it. And so knowledge without experience can be really dangerous because you risk doing the right thing at the wrong time or the right thing in the wrong way and completely mess it up. And, that's why that they send medical students out to accumulate over 10 years of experience before they become surgeons, because they know experience can't be taught and there's really no shortcuts. So when seeking advice, make sure you're seeking advice from an advisor that's not only independent, but also has enough experience within each asset class to really determine with credibility what the right approach and mix is for you. So, of course, you want the answer, how much should you be investing in property or shares? And whilst it's going to be different for everyone, and everyone's circumstances are different, what I like to do is really, when formulating a plan, have an end result in mind. So it's not really important to ascertain what the asset allocation should be today, but really what we want it to be by the time we reach, say, age 60. Let's call it 60 for most people, which is the age where most people want to have the flexibility to reduce working hours or stop working in totality. And so for most clients, what that would typically involve is 1 or 2 investment properties that by the time we get to age 60 will have a reasonable amount of equity in them, so a loan-to-value ratio of less than 50%. Plenty of cash in offset accounts. I'd like to typically have at least 2 years of living expenses in the offset account, or enough to reduce the negative to reduce the property portfolio's cash flow to neutral or positive. So I don't want any negative cash flow in retirement. Substantial super balances that are well invested in low-cost diversified index funds. And if cash flow allows, then a diversified portfolio of, again, low-cost index and bond funds in either a personal name or family trust. And these assets should be substantial enough so that we can comfortably fund retirement without eating into capital. But that's typically the kind of diversification, the level of diversification that I would seek to achieve for a client when developing a financial plan. Now, if I know that's the end goal, then that will clearly make it really clear to me about in what order do I need to accumulate those assets, and sort of what do I need to do between now and then to really achieve that sort of level of diversification. So there you go, the old property versus shares debate. The answer is really invest in both those assets, but understand you probably need to do that at different times, and that diversification really is the key, and just try and ignore all the noise in the market about what the shorter term returns might be in property and shares, and really adopt a very much a long-term approach, adopt the right asset selection methodologies and the investment methodologies, and in the long run it will produce good quality returns. Okay, that's it for this week. Until next week, bye for now.